It was a moment that sent shockwaves through the entire royal family. A tearful admission, a royal secret too big to hide, and a family caught between tradition and the future. What could have driven Prince William, poised as the future king, to break down on live television? And what does it mean for the future of the British monarchy? The transition from composure to vulnerability was immediate, and it was as if the air itself grew heavy in the room. For the first time in years, Prince William, usually so steadfast and composed, visibly struggled to maintain his usual calm. As the subject turned to the future, he seemed to unravel before the public's eyes. His voice, once steady and confident, began to crack. A tremor seized his words as he tried to speak about his son, Prince Louis, and his future within the royal family. It was no longer just a ceremonial address. This was a moment of unguarded emotion, of a father grappling with an unseen weight, speaking not just as the heir to the throne, but as a man facing a truth far too personal to ignore. His eyes welled with emotion, and for a fleeting second, the very foundation of the monarchy seemed to shift. "I can't lie anymore about what's coming," William said, his voice barely audible as the words tumbled out, laden with a mix of sorrow and undeniable vulnerability. It was a sentence that would forever change the course of royal history. In that singular moment, decades of royal tradition, of carefully crafted facades, collapsed, and the world was offered a rare, unfiltered look behind the polished armor of the House of Windsor. The silence in the room was deafening. His words hung in the air, palpable as everyone, his family, the press, the public, tried to make sense of the emotions that had just surfaced so unexpectedly. Queen Camilla, seated in the front row, turned to Princess Anne, her expression one of concern. The two exchanged a quick, knowing glance, aware that what they had just witnessed was far more than just a fleeting lapse in composure. Something deeper was at play, something much bigger than what the public could yet comprehend. Within seconds, the press captured every moment, and the news spread like wildfire. The hashtag #WilliamBreaksDown trended across social media platforms, and millions of people, from royal followers to casual viewers, scrambled to understand the cause of his emotional breakdown. What had triggered this rare display of fragility from the future king? Was it the pressures of the monarchy, the weight of succession, or was there something much more personal at the heart of his distress? For those within the royal circle, the answer seemed clearer. This wasn't a mere emotional outburst, it was a statement. Prince William, for the first time, had chosen to break the silence about a long-hidden truth, one that had been kept within the confines of royal corridors and sealed away in a file that few knew existed. And as he wiped his eyes, attempting to continue his speech, the damage had already been done. The cracks in the royal facade were too wide to be ignored. This wasn't just a rare moment of emotional vulnerability. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a quiet yet powerful rebellion against the very traditions that had governed the royal family for centuries. William knew the avalanche of consequences that would follow. In one sentence, he had lifted the veil on a secret that until now had been hidden away, something so sensitive, so potentially damaging, that it had been kept under lock and key for years. This secret, known only to a handful of senior royals, was now on the verge of being exposed. The contents of the mysterious Louis Contingency File were no longer rumors, they were reality. But what was this file, and why was it so important that it had been sealed away, hidden from the public eye? The file contained the truth about Prince Louis's future, a truth that could reshape the monarchy itself. What if this file, locked away for years, contained information so sensitive that it could alter the course of the royal family's future? As the story unraveled, it became clear that the document contained medical reports, psychological assessments, and evaluations regarding Louis's ability to fulfill royal duties. While the specifics of the diagnosis remained undisclosed, the implications were staggering. The report suggested that Prince Louis might face challenges that would prevent him from assuming his future role within the monarchy, challenges that had nothing to do with his will or ambition, but rather circumstances beyond his control. For William and Catherine, this revelation was not just a matter of public scrutiny, it was a deeply personal fight to protect their son from a destiny he had never asked for. Behind closed doors, they had fought tirelessly to prevent the contents of the file from becoming public, trying to shield Louis from the expectations placed upon him. But it wasn't just them fighting this bat. King Charles, ever mindful of the monarchy's image, insisted that the file remain sealed. He feared that public knowledge of Louis's condition could destabilize the already fragile perception of the royal family and the continuity of the crown. But Prince William had reached his limit. The silence, the secrecy, it had become too much for him to bear. He knew the truth needed to be exposed, no matter the consequences. And in his emotional breakdown, he had taken the first step toward unveiling a truth that the palace had fought so hard to suppress. This wasn't just about a medical diagnosis. It was about the weight of tradition, the pressure of legacy, and the impact that it had on the youngest member of the royal family. The monarchy's refusal to adapt to protect its own had led to this point, a breaking point, where the future of the monarchy was now intertwined with the future of one young child, Prince Louis. But even as William spoke his truth, the battle was far from over. Princess Anne, ever the fierce advocate for truth, had been watching closely, and she knew that the monarchy was at a crossroads. She knew that if the truth about Louis was not addressed, the consequences would be far-reaching. Behind the doors of Balmoral, she confronted King Charles with an ultimatum: face the truth about Louis or risk tearing the monarchy apart from within. The tension in the room was palpable. Anne was not one to shy away from difficult conversations, and this time her challenge was met with a forceful response. She presented a red envelope. Inside, the medical and psychological assessments of Louis, documents that few in the royal family had seen but many had speculated about. Anne's message was clear: the truth must come out or the press would expose it. There was no room for compromise, no more hiding behind tradition. As the pressure mounted, the royal family found itself at a tipping point. The truth about Louis was no longer just an internal matter, it was out in the open and the world was watching. The monarchy's carefully cultivated image of perfection was slipping through their fingers, and there was no turning back. The winds of change had begun to blow, and with it came the realization that the royal family, like the rest of society, could no longer cling to outdated traditions at the expense of its own members. The impact of that single moment was immediate, as if the very foundation of the monarchy had been shaken. For those watching from the outside, it was hard to comprehend the gravity of what had just unfolded. Prince William, the future king, renowned for his stoicism and unwavering dedication to his role, had just shattered that carefully constructed image. It wasn't just a fleeting emotional outburst, it was a calculated revelation, a deliberate act of exposing the very human side of the monarchy, something the royal family had fought for centuries to keep hidden. As the cameras flashed and the world's media turned its gaze toward him, the weight of his words began to sink in. "I can't lie anymore about what's coming." It wasn't just a statement, it was a confession, a raw admission of a truth long concealed. The room, which had been full of expectation, was now thick with tension, as though the walls themselves had witnessed a seismic shift. Even the seasoned members of the royal family, always so composed and controlled, could not hide their concern. Queen Camilla's sharp glance toward Princess Anne spoke volumes. This wasn't just a moment of personal struggle for William. It was a moment that had the potential to change everything for the monarchy. The public, ever hungry for royal drama, was quick to react. Within minutes of William's breakdown, social media exploded with speculation. The hashtag #WilliamBreaksDown began trending across the globe as millions of people tried to understand the source of his emotional upheaval. The questions came fast and furious. Was it the pressure of being the future king? Was it the strain of a personal issue? Or was there something more profound, something that had been hidden for years, now thrust into the public eye? Could it be connected to Prince Louis? For those within the royal circle, the answer was clearer than it might have appeared to the world. This wasn't just an emotional outburst. It was a deliberate, premeditated move, a bold statement against the very tradition that had bound his family for generations. William's breakdown was not a momentary lapse in control, but rather an intentional breaking of royal protocol. And in doing so, he had not only exposed his own vulnerability, but had begun to unravel a long-held secret, one that had the potential to upend the future of the monarchy itself. It became increasingly evident that this was not just a personal struggle for Prince William, it was a turning point in the royal family's history. William's decision to break free from centuries of tradition was both a personal and strategic move. His vulnerability, once a source of powerlessness in the monarchy, now became an undeniable force, one that had the potential to bring about a revolution in the way the royal family was perceived and how it operated. It was as though, in that moment, William had taken the first step toward freeing the monarchy from the confines of its own past. The timing of his revelation was not accidental. This breakdown had been long in the making, and those within the royal family knew it. It was a cry for change, a plea for the world to see the human beings behind the titles, the masks, and the expectations. William had crossed a line that no royal had dared to cross before, and in doing so, he had unleashed a floodgate of questions, doubts, and revelations that would force the monarchy to confront its deepest secrets. Behind the scenes, the monarchy's inner circle scrambled to control the fallout. In the wake of William's emotional collapse, speculation ran rampant. Was this just the beginning of something larger? Would other members of the royal family follow suit, breaking free from the constraints of their royal duties to speak their own truths? The public was on edge, waiting for the next revelation to emerge. But the biggest question loomed over the entire family. What exactly had Prince William just exposed? And what did it mean for the future of Prince Louis, the child at the heart of this unfolding crisis? As the days passed, whispers grew louder within royal circles. The truth about Louis was no longer something the palace could keep hidden. The carefully guarded file, now known as the Louis Contingency File, was no longer a well-kept secret. Those who had worked within the royal household for years knew of its existence, but few understood its true implications. What was inside that file was more than just medical assessments or psychological reports. It was the future of a child whose destiny had been forever tied to the throne, but whose own personal struggles could now change the course of royal history. And as the pressure mounted, it became clear that the family would have to decide how to move forward. Would they protect the institution as they had always done, or would they allow their personal struggles to finally be made public, exposing the cracks in the system and confronting the reality of what it meant to be a royal in the modern age? Prince William's emotional breakdown was only the beginning of a much larger story, a story that would reshape the future of the royal family, challenge centuries-old traditions, and force everyone to confront the costs of living a life bound by duty. And at the center of it all was Prince Louis, a boy who had never asked for the weight of the crown but whose future now seemed to be hanging in the balance. As the world watched in stunned silence, the palace was thrown into chaos. The carefully curated image of a family united in strength and duty had been shattered in an instant. Prince William's breakdown, his voice trembling with emotion, was not merely the result of personal strain. It was the first crack in a facade that had been meticulously constructed over centuries. The truth that had long been hidden, buried in the depths of royal secrecy, had suddenly become impossible to ignore. For years, the royal family had managed to keep the whispers surrounding the Louis Contingency File at bay. This document was one of the monarchy's most tightly guarded secrets. It contained information so sensitive, so potentially damaging, that its very existence had been kept from public knowledge. A file that had been carefully sealed and locked away, with only a select few knowing the true nature of its contents. And now, in a single moment, that truth was on the verge of being exposed to the world. The press had been relentless, and social media was abuzz with speculation. But despite the flurry of questions and theories, one thing became abundantly clear: Prince William's emotional breakdown had not been a sign of weakness. No, this was a deliberate act. It was a calculated statement, an unraveling of the tightly held secrets that had long defined the royal family's image of invulnerability. In that vulnerable moment, William had taken the unprecedented step of showing the world that there was more to the royal family than just tradition, titles, and duty. There were real people, with real struggles, and perhaps a truth that had been too painful to acknowledge for far too long. William's admission, his open, raw acknowledgement of what was coming, had torn down a wall that had stood for generations, and though he wiped the tears from his eyes, the damage was already done. The monarchy's ironclad mask of strength had been cracked, and the public, who had once viewed the royal family as untouchable, began to question what lay beneath the surface. What had William been hiding? What was so important that it had driven him to this breaking point? And most importantly, what did it mean for Prince Louis? The truth about that sealed file, the one William had carried for years in silence, was now on the brink of being revealed. It was a truth that could shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. Rumors swirled as insiders whispered about its contents: medical reports, psychological evaluations, and constitutional risk assessments. All of it tied to Prince Louis, the youngest of William's children, a boy who had never asked for the weight of the crown, but who was now at the center of a scandal that could change the course of royal history. As days passed, the tension continued to mount. The media, the public, and even the royal family itself were forced to grapple with the implications of William's breakdown. Was this just the beginning of a much larger crisis? Would the monarchy be able to survive the revelation of its deepest secrets? Or was this the moment that everything, the centuries-old institution, the legacy, and the family, began to unravel? Inside the palace, conversations were becoming increasingly heated. Prince William, though emotional, had taken the first step in breaking the silence. But now, the monarchy had to face the truth that had been kept hidden for so long. The question lingered in the air: what happens when the royal family is no longer seen as an unshakable institution, but as a vulnerable human entity? As the palace scrambled to control the narrative, it became clear that the fallout from William's emotional confession was only the beginning. The hidden file, the one that had remained locked away for so long, was no longer just a secret. It was a ticking time bomb, one that could potentially reshape the future of the monarchy itself. And as the world awaited the next chapter in this unfolding drama, one thing was certain: the royal family was no longer just an emblem of tradition. It had become something far more complex, more fragile, and more human. The contents of the Louis Contingency File were more than just bureaucratic assessments or royal formalities. They were a seismic revelation that could shake the very foundation of the monarchy. The file had always been an insurance policy of sorts, a carefully hidden plan that the royal family had kept sealed away from public view. It was designed to protect the institution, shielding it from any potential scandal or vulnerability related to one of its youngest members. But now, with Prince William's emotional breakdown exposing a crack in the royal facade, the truth about the file was beginning to slip into the light, and there was no turning back. Sources who had access to the file claimed it contained medical assessments that were both shocking and deeply concerning. These evaluations were not the type of routine reports the public had come to expect from the royal family. They were thorough, sensitive, and classified, detailing Prince Louis's health, emotional well-being, and a private diagnosis that had been made in 2023. That diagnosis, though still concealed from the public, was said to have significant implications for his future in the royal family. What was most unsettling about the file was the realization that it wasn't just about the potential challenges Prince Louis might face as he grew older. The report suggested that, due to factors beyond his control, there were deep-rooted obstacles that could prevent him from fulfilling the duties expected of him within the monarchy. These were not challenges he could overcome with time or training. They were intrinsic, possibly lifelong hurdles that could limit his ability to participate in the monarchy's future as originally envisioned. The implications were staggering. Prince Louis, the youngest member of the royal family, had always been seen as the future of the monarchy's next generation. But now it seemed that future was uncertain, not because of any fault of his own, but because of a hidden truth, one that his parents, Prince William and Catherine, had fought desperately to keep from the public eye. They had worked behind closed doors to protect Louis from a world that demanded perfection, shielding him from the kind of scrutiny that could come with such a revelation. But despite their best efforts, the truth was beginning to leak out, and the world was starting to question whether the monarchy, as it had always been, could survive the weight of such a secret. It wasn't just the public who was in shock. The royal family itself was grappling with the magnitude of the situation. For years, William and Catherine had quietly resisted the pressures of tradition, struggling to protect their children from the weight of the crown. But now, with William's emotional outburst exposing the strain, it seemed inevitable that the truth about Louis's challenges would eventually surface. The file was no longer just a secret. It had become a ticking time bomb, one that could alter the course of royal history. The public's reaction was swift and unforgiving. News outlets, social media platforms, and even politicians weighed in, with opinions divided over what this revelation meant for the monarchy. Some saw it as a betrayal, a violation of royal tradition that could undermine the very foundation of the institution. Others, however, sympathized with Louis and his family, recognizing the immense pressure placed upon a young child who had never asked for the life that had been thrust upon him. But regardless of the public's opinion, the truth had been laid bare. The monarchy was no longer the untouchable, perfect institution it had once been. It was now exposed as a complex, vulnerable family, struggling with its own internal battles. And as the story continued to unfold, one question remained at the forefront. What would the future hold for Prince Louis? And could the monarchy ever be the same again after such a revelation? The Louis Contingency File was no longer a hidden document in the royal archives. It had become the story, the defining meant that could either tear the royal family apart or force it to evolve into something more open, more human. But for now, one thing was certain. The monarchy would never be able to go back to the way it was before William's breakdown and the world's first real glimpse into the true cost of being a royal. Princess Anne had long been the royal family's steady hand, unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths, even if they came at a personal cost. She understood the immense pressures of royal duty, the sacrifices that had been demanded of her own family throughout the years. But this was different. This was about a child who had never asked for a life under the intense scrutiny of the monarchy. And Anne was determined to ensure that the truth about Louis's future was addressed, no matter the consequences. In a private drawing room at Balmoral, a tense and historic confrontation unfolded. King Charles, Camilla, William, and Anne stood together, facing a truth that could no longer be ignored. Anne didn't mince words. She placed a red envelope on the table, a symbol of the private crisis that had been brewing behind closed doors. The envelope contained copies of the medical and psychological assessments for Prince Louis, documents that had been kept hidden from the public eye, locked away in royal archives. Anne wasted no time. With a firm gaze, she locked eyes with her brother Charles and made her position clear. Either they confronted the truth about Louis's future, or the monarchy would face consequences that could tear it apart from the inside. There would be no more hiding, no more playing by the rules of royal protocol. This wasn't about tradition, it was about protecting a child. And Anne made it clear that she would no longer stand by and allow the monarchy to perpetuate an illusion of strength and unity at the cost of its youngest member. Charles, always the diplomat, tried to mediate, but Anne's resolve was unshakable. She called out the palace's secrecy, its refusal to address the painful realities of royal duty, and its tendency to prioritize image over the well-being of its members. Her words stung, but they were a wake-up call for the monarchy, an institution that had long prided itself on maintaining an air of perfection, regardless of the personal toll it took on those within it. Meanwhile, William, still reeling from his public breakdown, surprised everyone in the room. For the first time, he sided with Anne, quietly at first but with growing conviction. He admitted that the secrecy surrounding Louis's future was not about protecting him, it was about preserving the monarchy's image, upholding traditions that no longer served the family or the future of the crown. The truth was clear to him now. The cost of silence had become too great. He had reached his breaking point. Camilla, ever the defender of the monarchy's status quo, bristled at Anne's ultimatum. She questioned the timing, the public nature of the confrontation, and Anne's right to challenge the family in such a way. But Anne, unfazed by Camilla's opposition, remained steadfast. She knew the cost of silence all too well. She had seen firsthand the emotional toll of royal duty on her own family, the sacrifices that had been made for the sake of the crown. She was no longer willing to let history repeat itself with Louis. And then, in a moment of unparalleled tension, Anne delivered her final warning. If the truth about Louis's future was not addressed, she would act. She would not stand idly by while the monarchy continued its dance of denial. She would take matters into her own hands, and the world would know the truth, whether the palace liked it or not. With that, Anne left the room, leaving a lingering sense of urgency in her wake. The stakes had been raised. The monarchy's carefully crafted image of unity and control had begun to unravel, and the fallout from this moment would ripple through the royal family, through the palace, and into the public's consciousness in ways that no one could yet predict. In the hours that followed, the palace was in turmoil. Aides scrambled to assess the situation, to understand the implications of Anne's words and the possibility of the royal family facing the full force of public scrutiny. Who else knew about the contents of the Louis file? Would Anne actually risk everything to expose it? Or was this a calculated move to force Charles's hand, to get him to confront the truth head-on? The questions were endless and the answers were unclear, but one thing was certain: the monarchy was on the brink of a crisis of its own making, and outside the palace walls the public was already responding. What followed was a storm of emotions, accusations, and unexpected alliances, all of which left the monarchy teetering on the edge of an existential crisis. Princess Anne, as ever, had been the catalyst for change, the one who had pushed the royal family to confront the harsh realities they had so long avoided. Dead, her challenge to King Charles had been the match that set everything ablaze, but it was far from the only fire that had started to spread across the royal household. William, still struggling to come to terms with his own breakdown, found his voice in a way that shocked even his closest confidants. His admission that the secrecy surrounding Louis's future wasn't about protecting him, but preserving an illusion, struck a chord with the family. It was a moment of clarity, a painful realization that the monarchy, for all its pomp and grandeur, was built upon the very system that had failed to protect its youngest members. The weight of tradition had crushed Louis's innocence before he could even begin to understand the pressures placed upon him. And William, who had spent his entire life preparing to one day wear the crown, was now torn between his duty to the institution and his duty to his son. But it was Catherine's letter, the Windsor vow, that truly sent shockwaves through the palace and beyond. This was no mere plea. It was a powerful declaration from a mother who was willing to challenge the monarchy's rigid traditions to protect her child. In her letter, Catherine made it clear that no matter the legacy, no matter the history, she would not allow Louis to be sacrificed on the altar of royal expectations. She demanded that her son's emotional needs be respected, and that his gentle, intuitive nature would not be crushed beneath the weight of an institution that was unwilling to change. It was a letter written with love, but also with fierce determination. It was a call for reform, one that sought to preserve Louis's well-being over the crown's unyielding demands. When the Windsor vow was leaked to the press, the response was immediate and explosive. The public, already reeling from the emotional toll of William's breakdown, found itself further galvanized by Catherine's words. What had started as a personal revelation had now become a public rallying cry, a call for compassion and reform. The monarchy, which had always projected an image of unity and strength, was now faced with the raw vulnerability of a family caught in the crossfire of tradition and personal sacrifice. But the media frenzy didn't stop there. Just as the palace scrambled to regain control of the narrative, Meghan Markle, from her podcast platform, unleashed a statement that would send another wave of shock through the royal family. "No child should carry a crown heavier than their soul," she said, her words dripping with the weight of the crisis unfolding in the UK. Was this a personal message directed at Louis, a mother's empathy echoing across the ocean? Or was it a calculated move to further fuel the already raging storm around the monarchy? The timing of Meghan's statement was no accident. It came at the height of the media firestorm surrounding William's breakdown and Catherine's Windsor vow, and it felt like an intentional shot across the bow. The public quickly made the connection, and the palace found itself embroiled not only in the fallout from the breakdown and the letter, but also in a renewed wave of attention focused on Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal family. Whispers began to spread. Had Harry and Meghan known about the struggles surrounding Louis all along? Were they using their platform to expose the monarchy's failings? For the royal family, the stakes had never been higher. The crisis had moved far beyond a private family matter. It was now a public spectacle with the entire monarchy's future hanging in the balance. And as if to add fuel to the fire, Prince Harry, from his position on the outside, issued a live televised statement that struck at the very heart of the issue. In his address, Harry condemned the monarchy's treatment of its youngest heirs, decrying the emotional and psychological toll that royal life had exacted on his own family. He went further, calling for a complete overhaul of the way the royal family handled the well-being of its children. "We cannot continue to prioritize the crown over the human beings that bear it," he said, his words ringing with conviction. He called for the establishment of an independent commission to safeguard the emotional and psychological health of the royal children, ensuring that they were not subjected to the same pressures that had affected him and his brother. It was a stunning declaration, one that echoed William's own breaking point, an acknowledgement that the monarchy's obsession with duty and tradition had come at the cost of its members' humanity. The public response to Harry's statement was immediate and polarized. Some hailed him as a champion for reform, a voice of reason in an institution that had long been resistant to change. Others saw his comments as a betrayal, an attempt to destabilize the very institution that had given him everything. But one thing was undeniable: Harry's words had struck a chord, and the monarchy was now facing not only a crisis of its own making, but a growing movement for reform that could not be ignored. As the palace scrambled to control the narrative, it became clear that the monarchy was at a crossroads. The future of Prince Louis, and indeed the future of the royal family itself, now seemed uncertain. The question no longer seemed to be whether the monarchy would survive this crisis, but what kind of monarchy would emerge from the ashes. Would it be one bound by tradition and unyielding duty, or one that evolved to better serve its members, and most importantly, its children? In the end, the crisis had forced the royal family to confront a painful reality. The monarchy, for all its grandeur, could no longer afford to ignore the human cost of its power. This isn't just about a royal family caught in scandal. It's about tradition, family, and the future of a monarchy under pressure. If you're as captivated by this unfolding drama as we are, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with every shocking revelation. The monarchy's future may never be the same again. The question now is, will the royal family evolve, or will its secrets continue to drive it toward collapse? And what does this all mean for Prince Louis, a young boy caught in the eye of a storm he never asked for? We'll be here, bringing you every new twist and turn in this royal saga. Make sure you don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe, stay with us, and be part of the conversation.